I don't know if I'm going to have enough water for tonight.
Yo, I've been drinking water all day because Amazon, okay.
Well, I'm probably sure that all the cousins want to hear all about it because we're live right now. So, ooh.
Flipping.
Oh, like last week though?
Hey, this is a new day, okay?
Okay. Well, what's good, Jolene? How are you doing? It's about to be an epic one today.
I'm great. I have my popcorn, water.
like you legit have popcorn?
Popcorn.
Oh, okay.
Pen, water, trash talking.
All right.
How are you doing?
I'm good. I mean, I'm so ready for today. And I definitely got to send a special shout out to our cousin, Reggie. He was the first one in today. We missed you, Reggie. It's been a minute. Did anybody spell come up in there? Nope, still not there yet. But we will get there one day, y'all. It will happen. What's up, everybody? I'm Mark Monroe, accompanied by my wonderful co-host, co-producer, good friend, Galactic Catalyst, completely out here innovating in this lady of leisure space, and especially since she's the first one. So without further ado, I'll have to introduce my co-host, co-producer, and all those other great things, the wonderful
Jolene GC in the place to be. I feel like there's music that I hear, I'm walking down, even though I'm sitting.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. Well, let's just get some pleasantries out of the way. What's up, cousins? Glad that you're here. Hope you had a wonderful weekend. I know I did. Shout out to all Tuskegee fam in the building. We are out here 140 years later, July 4th, 1881. Tuskegee University was founded. So there you have that. For those in whom wish to celebrate the other holiday, which is Independence Day for the United States of America, Mazel Tov. And to all of those in whom wish to serve in the United Armed Forces, thank you. But if you haven't subscribed, go ahead and hit the subscribe button. And if you like the videos and what we do, and if you want to further out the mission, all you have to do is just hit the like button. And on top of that, all you have to do is just hit the bell when you want to be in the know for when we have a new episode that's hitting the streets. So we're going to get to this because we got a jam-packed episode today. And it's going to be something pretty special. If you've seen the scouting report title, it's going to be something in which that if you didn't see last week, then, I'm going to keep it coming. So Jolene, what do we have to talk about this market today?
Yo, what does it, cousin? This Jolene GC in the place to be, and it's Trade Talk Tuesday or whatever. Okay, so we have the Dow coming in at negative 208.98 points. S&P 500 was negative 8.80 points. And the NASDAQ was up 24.32 points. We got the VIX coming in hot at 16.44. And the 10-year Treasury, which I did look up again, is 1.35%. Perfect environment for these stocks out here. For sector performance, as you know, there are 11 sectors, and we break down, or rather, we're going to break it down for the top three and the bottom three so that we know what the rotation is looking like. So we got real estate coming in at number one, consumer discretionary, pause. Yo, Amazon got me out here. Like, let's just say if I did have a W-2, I would have peaced out. I would have been gone because the way Amazon was just out here. Okay. Anyway, now we got utilities. Those are the top three. Bottom three, we got materials, financials, and energy coming in at the bottom three. Now for pick performance, as you know, maybe you don't know, maybe you're new here. Well, you can go to our Instagram page at that come up series, and you can just scroll through and find our picks for right now, subject to change. We got Zscaler coming in at number one, DocuSign with a 52-week high, taking up the second place. And then we got Square that was legit fighting for its life. It's a whole other story. And then for the bottom three, we got XPO, CRISPR, and CWeb. Now, we did have some other 52-week highs. So shout out to no stranger to the 52-week high list, FTNT. We got FDN, NVIDIA, Adobe, Visa, Nike, which I was actually shocked about Nike because, after earnings, after earnings, I was like, okay, well, they probably just going to chill right here, maybe sell off a little bit. But nah, they staying there. So that's cool. We got Microsoft and Target. those were our top three. So Mark, you know, I'm feeling a little galactic or whatever. So, you know, I know you're on the vibes and the future innovation vibes. So,
Yep.
and I know there's like a lot. So let me just, you know, make sure my pencil is charged up. One moment. Okay, yes, we got 83%. That's cool. That's cool. So
All right.
I'm ready.
All right, y'all. Well, today it's an ancestor. We have pretty much an episode that's inspired by our ancestors. And if we aren't able to get through this entire power hour with y'all today, don't worry. There may be a part two. I think there's going to be a part two anyways, because there's so much that I want to teach today that honestly, I just want to have the time to. So I'm going to try to get through so much of it today. So let's just get to it. Let's just remove all the pleasantries and just get straight to it. Let's break all the ceremonies. You ready, Jolene?
I'm ready. I wish I lit a candle, but I'm ready.
Oh, wow. Do you need to go light a candle?
No, I just wish I would have did it beforehand.
All right. So let's talk about this thing called innovation, shall we? So innovation typically leads in forms of cycles in which that we know. So when we see innovation, right, it's like, you know, we've gone through it in different phases. Now, this chart that we're going to show today goes through 250 years worth of just cycles, dating all the way back to, I think, 1785, and then taking us all the way to where we currently are and also leading us to the future. So when we think about long waves of innovation, right, it's like we typically go through serious, significant periods of time in which that you can see that certain things that were either created or certain things that were literally, you know, inspired by or, you know, designed, whatever it was, it literally influenced the next set of years that came forth that followed after it in waves. So, of course, the one that we wanted to start off with today, and shout outs to our wonderful people over there at Visual Capitalist for providing such a presentation, because here we have essentially looking at it in 6 waves. So we're going to go through 6 waves of innovation today. So let's first look at it. And your first wave, shocker, Industrial Revolution. So your first and second wave, that was really just that was literally it. So over 100, and I think it was over 105 years worth of, for 115 years worth of time, you pretty much had an industrial revolution. So that included water power, textiles, iron, and then on top of that, you had like things like railways, such as steam power, rail, steel. So of course, those are the things that ultimately influenced. Through those things, we were able to create things, and you know, like for example, cotton clothing. Like that during that time, you had things like the cotton gin, but then ultimately we started seeing manufacturing start to pick up. And then on top of that, we had, say for example, railways, which allowed folks to get from place to place, along with bringing materials from place to place, which also increased things like GDP. So essentially, that's literally how things started to go through. And then as you can see in this third wave, we talk about electricity, chemicals, internal combustion engines, thanks to, you know, the Ford era. And then on top of that, we see petrochemicals, electronics, aviation over the next 40 years after that, which was brought to you in part by like the Boeings of the world and, you know, the McDonnell Douglases and Airbuses. And then, of course, we had within 1990s, we had the digital networks and software and new media. And then, of course, which brings us to today. So I guess let's look at some of those key breakthroughs. So if we look at it, during the Industrial Revolution, which was the first wave, like I said, we had the cotton mill, which was in Britain. And then after that, you had, say, for example, the railways, which proliferated the network, strongly influenced in urban growth. So when we say that they influence urban growth, exactly by what I said a little bit earlier, where you were able to move materials, whether it was clothing or, say, for example, food, or even people to get from place to place. You were able to do that from ways and means of transportation. Now, of course, the next wave that we had, which a lot of folks deem as probably one of the biggest things since the Industrial Revolution, was Henry Ford's Model T introduced the assembly line. So which means that during that period of time of, you know, pretty much manufacturing, especially mass manufacturing back in those days, you essentially had massive amounts of cars that were able to be produced over and over and over and over. And then this revolutionized what we knew as the automotive industry. Now, of course, what followed from like rail and then ground through car ultimately influenced the next thing, which was, say, for example, your aviation. So so pretty much we gained massive adoption on a global scale, providing a lever to economic integration. So just like what we saw through railways or railroads or even using cars, a la trucks, Then we also had this thing where people could go from country to country or continent to continent. And essentially therein, you saw travel, businesses, the world started becoming a little bit more and more smaller. We started to see more of the global economy start to take shape, form, and fashion, which led us into our fifth wave, in which that we had just passed. It's very shocking, but that wave has just now passed. And it's like, if you didn't know it, well, surprise, we are now out of the fifth wave. And that was introduced in 1990, where we had 2.3 million use the internet. By 2016. This reached 3.4 billion as of, pretty much, think about where we are today in devices. There's 7 billion people in the world, and probably over 60%, 67% have access to some type of smartphone device or some type of access and means to the internet, which is amazing. So if you think about it, that was a wave in which that influenced, like, for example, companies like Microsoft, Apple, Facebook. Netscape was one of those companies, but they're no longer in existence anymore. Shout out to Andreessen, Mark Andreessen, for creating Netscape. And then it brings us to today is this sixth wave, where we're trying to solve problems such as climate change, as well as producing more and more clean technology that reshapes business models and human consumption patterns. Now, why does this all matter? Like, some of you are sitting there saying, well, Mark, this is great. We kind of understood this. This is just a brief little history lesson as it pertains to where is it that we're going. Well, I would kind of be remiss if I would not give you a quick glimpse of where we currently are as of today. Now, I'm going to use another thing for folks that, if you'd like to, visual capitalists. I try to provide, we here at the Come Up series, so myself and Jolene included, we try to literally give you access to materials in which that you can go and look at for yourself that don't cost you anything, that ultimately that you have access to. So there's this report that came through Visual Capitalists called Anticipating the Future of Vehicles. So a lot of electric and driverless cars are becoming the new normal. Now, of course, this is nothing new, but shout outs to eToro for literally putting it together. Essentially, we're going to skim through this because there's some more data that we want to get through to. And we're going to just briefly touch upon this. And then we're going to show you exactly really where we're going and where is it that we sit in the grand scheme of things. So if you haven't been realizing lately, then you're starting to see a massive wave of manufacturing as it pertains to electric vehicles. And of course, along with electric vehicles, brings in new forms of technology. Think about it. Like, you have cars that have become more smarter, more efficient, and of course, become more connected. Now, this just didn't start with electric vehicles. We saw this with, for example, way back when with companies like OnStar and those types of things. Well, today it brings us to a place in which that we can see that now our cars are more connected than ever. We are going to start doing more things with our vehicles, and our cars are going to be more and more anticipatory as well as smarter. So, of course, which brings us to driverless technology. So passenger vehicle sales, let's just look at it now. Of course, this is just looking at it from the basics of internal combustion engine vehicles, as well as fuel cell vehicles, plug-in hybrids, as well as just fully battery electric. Now, notice something here. We started off in 2015 where you couldn't even think about, for example, anything else outside of internal combustion engine. Now, we're talking about 80 million vehicles that were sold on an annual basis. So from 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019, and then here we are in 2020. And then we kind of peaked. We plateaued within this space. Now, notice we started to see these small little glimpses down here at the bottom where we started to see, okay, hey, there's this thing called, an electric car, or there's this plug-in hybrid. So if I want to have internal combustion, but if I want to have some electricity to give myself range or be a little bit more anticipatory as it pertains to, range and climate, then I can do those things. But now here we are in 2021, we're starting to here's where we've come to this antithesis. Now, of course, it's mind you, here we sit in 2021 where we're starting to see some life into other areas outside of internal combustion engine. One of those gray areas happens to be battery electric. Now, of course, it's no surprise for anybody out there. We're starting to see, so many cars out there galore, but they still do not take up a significant amount of market share. Just as of today, I think that in certain places, electric vehicles represent 11% of all vehicles sold. So, which lets you know that we still got a long ways to go. But notice we've seen this huge drop off from internal combustion engines, and that's not going anywhere. If anything, you're going to start seeing a rise, which to some folks, you look at this diagram and say, well, Mark, this is kind of like rising and we're starting to see it rise. No, look at the bottom. You're starting to see the bottom part, which represents plug-in hybrids, fuel cells, which could be hydrogen or whatever it could be, or also even battery electric. You're starting to see them come into the forefront, which means that by 2040, you're going to see that they make up over 50% of the entire market share of annual sales year over year. So how do we get there? And that's just the vehicle sales. That's not even including the autonomy part. So the autonomy test, or the autonomous test at miles in California, this is a report from, say, for example, 2019 of December to November 2020. A disengagement is a driver intervention taken in the case of safety, software fault, or out of precaution. The more miles per disengagement, the further a car could drive itself before it needed a driver to step in. So just think about exactly how far we've come along, where we first started having we started this thing called autonomy. And it's like the same thing when we think about it in, flight. If you think about in most flights or in most commercial airline flights, they have autopilot or they have autonomy, some form of autonomy in there. Now, of course, at any point in time, the pilot can take control. Now, it's not to say that all flights are completely autonomous, but they could be because of the fact that there's very little barriers as it pertains to what stops them outside of climate or weather risk, or maybe even just some electrical failures. I won't be shady today, I promise, though I want to be. So if we think about like the patent/investors, here are some of the players in which that we see, like when we talk about miles per disengagement. So for example, with AI, whenever you see a human start to step in, then AI will essentially learn from this. Now, here are some of the major players that we know of. You have Cruise, which is through GM. You have Waymo, which is through Google. You have Pony AI, which is through Toyota. Now, as of recently in 2020, Amazon bought a company by the name of Zoox for $1.6 billion. And ultimately, it's like now they're thinking about that as it pertains to robotaxis. You have a company called Neuro, which is owned by SoftBank. You have AutoX, which is owned by Alibaba. You have Lyft. Well, Lyft. You couldn't come up with a more craftier name. Mercedes-Benz, though that they're now working with NVIDIA. We'll talk about that a whole nother day. Argo AI, which is through Ford and Volkswagen. And then, of course, we have Apple, which we're hearing some things there. But honestly, it's like, okay, well, we still know nothing. Now, then we look at this thing called miles. So as you can see here, 770,000 miles driven through, say, for example, through GM's Cruise, 628 and 839,000 through Waymo. And then, of course, when we think about miles per disengagement, Waymo has technically kind of like superseded everybody so far, of course, with Cruise sitting there in a hefty second. And then, of course, Alibaba's AutoX and then Argo AI, which is kind of like tied there between Pony AI. So when we think about the forecast of autonomous vehicle growth, they think about like by 2026, you're looking at about $556 billion as it pertains to market cap growth. So that's amazing, because if you think about $556 billion worth of market cap growth, or just market cap period by 2026, which is, if you put it into perspective, that's literally just 5 years from now. Just imagine all the things that could take place within 5 years. Like, think about the college kid from when they first go in their freshman year, from 4 years when they come out. Are they the same person, or do they think differently? Do they kind of act differently? And do they kind of operate and move differently? That's exactly how it moves as it pertains to when we look at the growth of, say, for example, autonomous vehicles. So essentially, that's going to be a hefty size market that a lot of folks are going to want to be players in. And just like consumers, governments and automakers worldwide are realizing that EVs and efficiency are key in more sustainable future. So automakers invest at least $300 billion in EVs and batteries in 2019, but countries like China and Germany are currently leading the driverless future. Now, of course, we talked about this a little while back where we talked about US versus China, and you're starting to see other countries that are doing the same thing because of the fact that they believe that essentially that we must reinvest into these types of technologies so that way we can be ahead of these. And ultimately, whoever leads in these arenas. Now, keep in mind, for the sake of this conversation, Tesla has been left out of this conversation, just so that way we can be somewhat unbiased. And ultimately, we could have found another infographic that has Tesla, but we wanted to show you what the other side of the market looks like. So that way you can actually have somewhat of a well-rounded perspective. So these countries are making the investment because of the fact is, it's like, this is now the new battleground. Technology and innovation is really the now battleground. Once upon a time, it was military power and all this other stuff, and also, science as it pertains to genetics, and that's still a battleground. But now we're also looking at the further things as it pertains to artificial intelligence. And one of those places is autonomy. So when we look at EV investment flows, and mind you, this is a report from 2019. So if you look at the origin of the automaker, it goes from the origin of the automaker, and then it takes its way all the way to, say, for example, another side. So if you look at Germany, $139.5 billion as it pertains to investment flows, that's Volkswagen, Audi, Daimler, Porsche, BMW, and Mini Cooper, which I think they're technically owned by BMW, but that could be a whole different story. Now, look at the outflows as it pertains to this destination. Well, you have, say, for example, China, which is a huge major player or a huge major buyer. Now, that's $135.7 billion as it pertains to destination. Now, when we look at China, $57 billion from some of their folks, where you have Great Wall, GAC Motor, and JAC. Now, let's move on down a little bit. Let's look at the United States, which represents $39 billion. And then here you see Ford, Fiat, Tesla, and GM. Now, of course, as you can see, they go through different places, whether it's Germany, you can see the destination from 39 to 34. As it pertains to vehicles, they go from one place to another. And it just goes on and on and on and on. Whether you have Japan, you have South Korea through Kia and Hyundai, you have France, which is really through, Renault and Yugo. And then on top of that, you have India with Tata Motors, as well as UK with Jaguar and Land Rover. And then, of course, we can't forget about our friends over there in Sweden, which is through Volvo. And as you can start to see, the further down that we get, you start to see that their outflows essentially start to become less and less and less. Okay. So let's look at the top investments as it pertains to where they're spending by the investments by automaker. So if we look at it, now this can be this can really play tricks on your eyes when you look at the data, because here it says combined total, where you have Volkswagen, Audi, and Porsche. They have spent $91 billion as it pertains to investment in EV space. Then, of course, you have Daimler at 42, and then, of course, you have Ford at 11. Ford recently committed to $22 billion in EV investments through 2025, and another $7 billion in autonomy. Then, of course, we have GM is also stepping up its increased EV spending of $27 billion by 2025. Now, currently, as of 2019, they were only spending $8 billion and $11 billion respectively. I wonder what actually pulled them out to literally do that. Now, of course, that's for a whole nother conversation. Again, I'm not going to be shady. I'm going to try not to be. So if we think about it, billions are being spent on futurizing vehicles and minimizing prices from traditional car makers in Silicon Valley alike. Now, why does that make sense? If you can future-proof your car, then ultimately the cost as it pertains to what you can do is essentially significant, because now it's like, if you future-proof your car, think about the types of things in which you can do with it. Now, this is where I have to pull in Tesla into the conversation to give everybody a frame of reference. If you look at most of Tesla vehicles that are on the road today, they're pretty much future-proof. All they need today is pretty much an upgrade in their chip here and there, and then essentially the addition of autonomous driving feature in your car, then you pretty much have a new car. Now, what does that look like? Why do we say future-proof? Because the car keeps learning, and as they keep learning from the car, then ultimately they keep updating it over the air. So if you ask any Tesla owner, they will literally tell you whenever you receive an update, it's like your car is brand new all over again. So, and with that chart that literally leads towards the advantage of Tesla. Unfortunately, this is where when we get to the end, I have to draw them in, because Tesla is not about outselling everybody. It's more so in the sense of getting internal combustion engines off of the road. And then on top of that, introducing autonomy and, say, for example, software related areas to make things more efficient, and thus making other players come outside and play with them instead of playing in their typical sandbox that they're accustomed to. So now you've just done that, then you've just saved consumers a significant amount of money, but yet at the same token, you could probably see that the cost of the vehicle could probably also increase because of the fact that you have a future-proof car, you're going to pay for that premium up front, but yet at the same token, you'll have to pay less and less and less over the lifetime of the vehicle. Now, reflective of the hype, consumers are showing an increased desire to purchase EVs. Now, that's no shocker to anybody. It's just to let you know that as things start to go into the foray, and we're going to get into that in the next thing, you're going to start to see that essentially that people will start to make more and more of an investment. So we went from, say, for example, back in 2019, where U.S. consumer interest in EV for the next purchase, 4% were definitely saying yes. And then there was 27% in considering, 40% interested for future purchase, and then 29% were once upon a time uninterested. Now, this is back again in 2019. So it'd be interesting to see what that data says in 2021, especially as things are starting to come out more and more. And hence the reason why you have Ford. I mean, something must have changed, because if that wasn't the case, then Ford would not make a all-electric Ford F-150. GM would not bring out, say, for example, an all-electric Hummer. And many of the other players in the space would not be going all-electric and changing their entire fleets to electric vehicles and just completely getting away from, say, for example, internal combustion engines. So there's something that must be said there. So what's certain for investors and everyone is that automotive landscape is undergoing a massive transformation. And that's a fact. Just like what we saw when we saw the Industrial Revolution, where things change, where you think about how is it that manufacturing of clothing and different materials started to take place. And I'm probably sure that there was some pushback there, but all in all, in the end, innovation will typically win over time. So the electric and driverless future, here are 4 lines investors should keep an eye on in the near future. So of course, you got to look at the dominant players. The new dominant players, well, once upon a time, when we think about internal combustion engine, was like companies like Ford, GM, and all those other companies. But now you have top automakers where it's like market capitalization as of this month, or as of last month, June 2021, 100% electric. You have in market cap, you have Tesla sitting at just a little bit under half, or just a little bit over half $500 billion in market cap. And then, of course, you have Toyota, Volkswagen, Daimler. And of course, notice you're not really seeing any other, say, for example, American automakers outside of General Motors. Now, of course, a revised model of ownership. With autonomous cars starting to come online and companies eager to offer taxi and distribution services, reliance on shared mobility may increase, reducing personal ownership of cars. Kind of like what I said early on, which leads into the vision. Half of car owners today will no longer want to own a personal vehicle by 2025. So potential of shared mobility and autonomous driving by 2030 doesn't seem that far off. Look at what's already taking place in China from 2017 versus, say, for example, where they're going in 2030. And you can see it across to the rest of the board when we look at Europe and the United States, though that China has an edge against the other countries because, again, they're willing to make the type of investment. So this looks at the inventory of what we see in 2017 and look at how the inventory is really starting to diminish itself. So autonomous vehicles in China will travel about 13% of total passenger kilometers by 2030 and 66% by 2040. That's crazy, but it's not so far-fetched to believe that it won't happen. So let's bring it into the third case. Investment drives use cases. As we all know, where you see the money goes, that's where you ultimately see that where things will start to make the biggest amounts of change. So increased investment in EVs and autonomous driving is adding functionality and driving down costs, further increasing use cases in transportation and enterprise. So it's not surprising that you don't see that, or that you're starting to see other places where they're looking at semi-trucks or, say, for example, buses and those types of things, hailing services. That's a major part. So when we think about e-hailing, that's the tech cluster in which that you can see that about $56.2 billion in investment have been spent. I'll look at Uber and look at Lyft, look at Diddy, and then also look at other players like GM Cruise, as well as Waymo. Then we also have semiconductors, because you can't have autonomy without semiconductor space. That's about $38 billion, and this was back as of 2010. So then we also have sensors and other types of compounds or components. And then when we think about connectivity and infotainment back in 2010, this is looking at, say, for example, $20.8 billion. Then, of course, you have other things like telematics and intelligent traffic, so AKA moving into your smart cities. And, of course, you have to build a back end of cybersecurity because, of course, you can't let your vehicles get hacked, people. Anybody who's seen Live Free, Die Hard where it's like they literally took over vehicles, or seen a Fast and the Furious movie that kind of scared people where vehicles fall outside of a building because they were autonomously moving. You got to have some form of dope cybersecurity. So that's just to put it into perspective. Now, the fourth is an uneven map. While some countries such as China and Germany are heavily leading in EV and autonomous investment, assessing adoption readiness paints a different picture. So as you can see, adoption is taking place, but it's also taking place in some places at a slower rate. AKA, look at, for example, in Netherlands. Netherlands leads on EV charging stations per paved road and per capita. Norway, EVs made up 56% of vehicles purchased in Norway in 2019. But when we look at, say, for example, places in the United States, not exactly quite the same. Now, if we look at Singapore, leads in autonomous ready policies and road quality. So it means that they've made the investment in their roads. And I challenge anybody to go look at Singapore's innovation and how much they've spent. They have a YouTube video where they spent a ton of money to literally put the infrastructure in place. A lot of times the technology will be there, but is the infrastructure there to support it? So you have to have roads that support it. You have to have signs. You also have pavement. You also have to have a bunch of other things that play in, even charging. So with those types of things, when you have that infrastructure put in place, it puts everything into perspective. So now when we look at, say, for example, top 20 countries by autonomous vehicle readiness, well, of course, the United States would be there at number 4 because look at the type of companies that are creating the autonomous technology. NVIDIA comes out of the United States. GM Cruise comes out of the United States. Zoox, I guess officially since it's been acquired by Amazon, I guess we can kind of count that as also a United States company, though that it came out of Europe. And then, of course, we have Tesla, which is the big elephant in the room, as well as Waymo, in which that they're also based here in the United States. So if you put it in, it's like Toro. It's like that's pretty much it. Their driverless copy portfolio comes from NVIDIA, Marvel Technology, Volkswagen, GM, Tesla, Intel with Mobileye Technology, NIO, as well as BMW, Google, and Daimler. So there's that as it pertains to what we see. But we're not done. We are not done. But I'm going to take a water break.
Yes, pause for the cause. So anyway, it seems like we have, so as we're talking, when I'm thinking about this, like in the context of the environment, and something that Rob Maurer said, it was the way he said it was almost akin to like a King Solomon moment where, you know, the two people came, the two women, they were fighting over the baby, and he's like, split the baby in half. The mom was like, no, you can have the baby. And then, you know, King was like, you're the real mom. And he had said something along those lines of, he doesn't care, you know, who is number one. It's more so like these vehicles are available. And so it seems like we're moving in this context of, you know, saving the planet and renewable energy and all that. It seems like we're moving from like the individual to shared, collaboration, or from competition to collaboration, from labor to leisure. And that's why I like it.
I see what you did there. Okay, which drives me to my next point. And, you know, it's kind of interesting, you know, that we get to this point because it's very, as you know, it's very near and dear to me because of the fact that that's the world that I come from. And so anytime that I can share these types of tools and resources with the people, I'm definitely going to do so and try to break it down for you in real time. For each and every single one of you to be able to say, oh, okay, that's interesting. All right, that's an interesting point. May need to study that, but here it is. All right, so this is coming from McKinsey, where they created the Tech Trends Index. Now, it's interesting that we go through this is because of the fact that here's a diagram, yet again, another diagram in which that we provide y'all. I'm sorry, yes, it's another one. So, but it's good though. It's a very, very good one. And we're going to always give you guys quality things in which that you can look at and say, all right, well, how is it that I can really see it? Like, how is it that I can visualize it? Excuse me. They have to switch over to the bubbles. Okay. So if we think about it, we have a vertical side, which is pretty much the industry applicability. So industry application, industry acceptance. And then we have on the bottom side, we have what is called the technical maturity. So which means that where is it at in the grand scheme of things? So let's quickly go through the applicability. From the very, very base, we have niche markets, which honestly, we're starting to lose more and more of those. Then we also have multiple industries or horizontals, which as you can see in this diagram, there's a lot in there. We're going to get to it. Then we also have cross-cutting technologies where it's just across the board, where it's just like literally across the entire landscape. It's going to be a game changer no matter how you try to form it or shape it. It is what it is. So then we also have on the bottom side, we have, as it pertains to the maturity from low to high. Low would mean, like, for example, we're just in the research phase. So we're just beginning to just scratch the surface. We're very much so just getting started. And so, really a lot of these things are just like, they're just being discovered. Then we also have what is called the market entry stage. So this is really like your early adopters and everything else, or say, for example, your trendsetters of such technology. And then we have the industry adoption, where the industry recognizes, okay, this works. We need to be using this because of the fact that we're being led to this by either our consumer base, our investors, or just the global economy is just heading in this direction. So let's also deal with some of the rules here. As you can see, the circle color represents the momentum compared with 2015 through 2018. So of course, light blue is higher. Dark blue is, or mid blue is no change. And then pretty much black is, or navy blue, I don't know what they want to call it, is considered lower. And then of course the circle size represents the momentum. So of course the smaller the size, the less momentum. And then the larger the circle means the higher the momentum. And that's compared to 2018, 2020. Okay, so if we think about it, we look at it from this perspective. If we look at it from industry applicable, which you can start to see a lot of things because the market is leading that way. They're looking towards things in which that ultimately that can be across multiple industries or multiple horizontals in which that it's across different sectors. So for example, whatever tech is doing, whatever tech that is created, especially AI focused tech, it's got to be able to touch multiple different facets across, say, for example, real estate, industrials, financials, and so on and so on and so on. Now, if we look at it, we have some things that are still within its research fundamentals. Like, for example, we have nanomaterials. They're starting to come out of fundamental research and make their way into market stage entries or market entry stage. We also have next generation computing, which you've been hearing a lot of through, say, for example, companies like AMD, NVIDIA, and many different other players, in which that they're now starting to move out of fundamental research and they're now starting to become more and more mainstream. Now, it's interesting because of the fact that these are, like, I just gave you two low levels. One is like close to a niche market, which is nanomaterials. Think about nanotech when we wear it, or if you want to get Hollywood on us, then think about Iron Man and his nanotech suit. And then if we think about cross-cutting technologies, we're thinking about next generation computing. Now, of course, there's this thing called applied AI. Now, notice one is considered lower and then the other one is considered no change. Now, the reason why we say that is because of the fact that they become so cross-cutting that essentially it's like you don't really need to really see any significant amounts of momentum or anything like that, because of the fact that they just become the industry, they just become the standard as it pertains to whatever the trend is. They define the standard. So when we look at where their maturity is, like I said, you see a lot of these things that are really either in the cross-cutting or multiple industry sector. You see them right there smack dab at market entry stage. So what does that mean to each and every single one of the investors? To each and every single one of you as investors. I'll get to that in a second. So then we have these things that are going into industry adoption because of the fact that you start there first, especially when you think about companies today, they focus more so towards, we can't really adopt it unless we know that it's one, secure, two, it's efficient for us as it pertains to adoption. So we're not spending an exorbitant amount of money to adopt it. And then three, essentially, it's like it doesn't make us have to completely change our business model. So that's where you have things like future connectivity, trust architecture, next level process automation, and virtualization, which brings me down to the next thing. And don't worry, I'll send this out to everybody, or I'll just drop this into the link into this episode today. So don't worry, you can always come back and look at it. But let's look at it. It's divided across different sectors. And when I mean by sectors, I mean like industry agnostic, which means that it can play across different types of sandboxes, to industry specific, where it's just like, all right, it only works here. So I'm going to go through maybe just a few of these things just to show you exactly where they're at in the grand scheme of things. And then essentially, I'm going to show you some of the other things that are very much so specific. So if we look at automation and virtualization, as you can see, it's more so in the sector of where we had it towards industry adoption. So across the entire industries, it's starting to be widely adopted across multiple different industry sectors. So now we have, say, for example, investments. So we're looking at it in the billions. Now, of course, we're thinking about digital twins, which we heard from, ARK Invest ideas for 2020 or 2021. That was in there. So if you look at it, we're now at the point of $105 billion as it pertains to investments that were drawn towards it. When we think about new mentions or news mentions, we went from 271 to about 347. And then when we think about patents granted, these are, again, in the thousands. So when you think about in the thousands, that's 347,000. When we think about patents granted, that's 167,000 as of, say, for example, patents granted since 2020. Now, we don't really care about the combined momentum score. You can get into that if you would like to, but here's the reason why it matters. Because this trend will shift competition towards capital expenditure investments and automation technology and towards the social, emotional, and technological skills needed as intelligent machines take over more physical, repetitive, and basic cognitive tasks, all while compressing value chains and as companies use pretty much AM to make products and components closer to home, a la, hence the reason why you're starting to see more manufacturing plants come out. So what's the process automation? So we think about things that are self-learning. Robots will drive automation of physical processes beyond routine activities. We know this. This is just the very beginning of iRobot, so to speak, for anybody that needs to understand. Virtualization, as advanced simulations and 3D or 4D printing continue to dematerialize processes and make them virtual, dramatic shorter development cycles will become possible. So think about it. Like imagine where, say, for example, a company like, let's say a Santa Monica company like AMD could literally come forth and literally say, okay, hey, we introduced this product earlier in the year. But then as we go towards the second half of the year, they come out with a completely new process or a completely new product. So they literally just did 2 major launches within the same year. So what do those applications look like? You got automotive. Automotive is really going to be the battleground over the next 3 years. Manufacturing, big manufacturer use collaborative robots. Municipalities, the city of Carson, Nevada created a digital twin to simulate future water supply based on usage hours. And then aerospace. As you can see, global aerospace supplier prototyped a 25% lighter 3D printed fuel nozzle. It could quickly produce at scale with no increases in complexity. So, I mean, there's some things that go beyond it, but those are just the real biggest things that you should look at, especially when you think about the industrial Internet of Things. Everybody knows about Internet of Things when you think about it on the consumer side. But what does the industrial part look like? We're moving from just the consumer side of things and going into the industrial landscape. Of course, that's where the big money is. If you think about, like, for example, think startups. Startups either focus on the consumer or they focus on something that's enterprise. Enterprise is much more higher level, much more macro, bigger markets, and at the same token, much more harder to crack. But when you think about consumers, you're just solving the problem for the everyday person that fits, say, for example, your demographic. Now let's get to this thing called the future of connectivity, which is very interesting because we're just at the entry point for the market. Now, of course, it's going across, again, multiple different sectors. So when we think about it, this is very much so at this very beginning, where we look at $3 billion in 2020, 200,000 in news mentions, patents granted, 96,000 patents in 2020. So of course, why it matters. Super fast connectivity and internet has broad implications for organizations. It supports the creation of new services and business models like to sensor-enabled intelligent products yields new value chains and so on and so on and so on. So it's the future of technology. What most folks know of when we think about the future of connectivity is like 5G. So high band or low to mid band range is 5G. Up to 80% of the global population by 2030 will probably have access to that. And that's over short distances for now, but then ultimately we'll probably go into longer distances. So what do those applications look like? You have telecommunications, the easiest one. But then here's where it gets even further. Think about sports and entertainment. A 5G sports stadium upgrade targeted real-time updates on players, improved security, crowd sentiment analytics, and high-definition 360 augmented reality replays for fans. And then on top of that, when we think about things like transportation, the Chinese railway station used 5G for automated detection of station incidents and anomalies via Internet of Things, for example, videos and flow detection. And so that's a major part right there. So now let's go into a little bit of something that's like the future of programming, because this is where we really think about it when we think about like software development, and where we are moving more so out of the hardware, because hardware has just become so analogous, or pretty much it's always been there. And it's like, of course we're going to make improvements over time, but it's really going to be the software languages that ultimately improve. Kind of like the English language. If you think about the English language itself is very much so linguistic, where it's forever changing. Just think about it like this. The word ain't was once upon a time, it wasn't a word. It was never really considered a proper word. Now, all of a sudden, it's now in the English dictionary across whether it's Oxford or Webster. And then on top of that, when we think about the other words that are showing up in slang are now starting to become so widely adopted that now they also become a part of the English speaking dictionary. So what does the future of programming look like? I mean, that's where it's like you're starting to get into a world in which that software starts to write itself. I mean, it's not to say that we're going to get rid of software developers. We're still going to need them. Somebody's going to have to initiate the code. But sooner or later, the software will ultimately start to learn itself and ultimately start to rewrite itself. Okay. So if we look at it, look at the amount of investment where we hit a peak point in the investment before 2020. And now we're at only $49 billion in investment. So just think about it. We went from $435 billion in investment to now $49 billion. And then when we think about mentions, the same thing applies. 692,000 mentions versus now we're dropping. And when we look at patents, we're starting to get to the point where patents really don't really matter anymore because of the fact that the software is ultimately writing itself and you just can't keep up. So why does this matter? It's all about scale. When we think about data-rich AI, it drives applications in which that ultimately it's like they can reach across multiple different networks and everything else. So when we look at those trends, the future of programming, new ways of writing software and reduces complexity. However, as companies look to scale their software development capabilities, they will need to master data operations and machine learning operations practices. These are just things in which that will ultimately take place. It's just part of the process of the standard operating procedure. But what happens? Well, if you have those types of things within programming, look at what happens again. Notice this is the third time that you've seen automotive within the same presentation. Telling you something. Implementation paradigms for software. This is perfect for, say, for example, the automotive industry, especially when we think about autonomous driving. When we think about entertainment, Metaflow by Netflix provides a unified API, application platform interface or program interface to infrastructure stack. So pretty much as a result, median deployment time at Netflix reduced by 16 times from 4 months to 7 days. So that lets you know that they can literally deploy something where it doesn't take them that long to deploy a show or a movie. And then look at financial services. I mean, think about how much time that it used to take to actually go to a bank versus now you can actually just start a bank account online and literally have access to all your banking services. Now, these are just the things that we look at as it pertains to just software programming. Now, here's the reason why these things matter, it's like, because I know I just said a lot of information, but here's the reason why these things matter to each and every single one of you. Because investors take this information and then they are able to plot out what they learned today, and they're able to plot it out over sets of years. They use this data to say, all right, well, now it's like, here's some homework for each and every single one of you. Who would be those players that are within each and every single one of these different trends that you see that is either a trend setter or, say, for example, just on the cusp or a researcher, or, say, for example, a follower? You know, those are the things that you definitely want to pay attention to, because they really put it into perspective of, okay, hey, if I'm going to be investing my dollars, or, you know, really thinking about how generation wealth will be created. A lot of you are like, well, Mark, a lot of this stuff is over my head. And I totally get it. But when you go back and read this information, you'll kind of like get a perspective and saying, all right, well, this is where my generational wealth will be created. Like, this is where the investment dollars will be. And this is where they're already starting to be at. And they're only just increasing their investment. So, of course, we can look at the basic things like today, like, for example, the Microsofts, the Apples of the world, the Amazons, and everything else. But the question that we have to ask ourselves is pretty much who's going to take their place? Who are the companies that are ultimately driving forth the innovation that they want to acquire so that way they can have somewhat of an advantage over, say, for example, their competitors? You know, those are the things and where it matters. Like, if you really think about it, here's a little thing about Amazon that I know. Never worked at Amazon, had an opportunity to sit on an advisory board with Amazon, but that's as far as it goes. But here's what I do know about this company. This company is willing to literally treat every single software engineer as a rock star at that company, because of the fact is they tapped into something that they knew was gold, and that was software development. And they got so good at it that essentially they started looking at it from a machine learning standpoint. And from a machine learning standpoint, the machine learning and the algorithms ultimately started to learn the stacks in which that many of those great, brilliant minds and software developers were creating. So it allowed them to deploy services a lot faster. Just imagine what happens when you're able to deploy things to your consumers or to your enterprise customers a lot faster. Like, just think about that. Like, that's the main thing that allowed Amazon to beat other industries or other sectors within the industry. Like, the fact that you were able to scale a lot faster and to release products and services better than anybody else. It had nothing to really do about the product, because if you think about it, what product does Amazon sell? If you look at Amazon Prime, then that's not really a product, that's a service. If you look at Prime Video, that's not really a product either, that's a service in which that they built to scale. If you look at, say, for example, it's Amazon AWS, that's not a product, that's a service. The products that sit on top of AWS are the products that are built, like, for example, your Etsy's and those types of things. And even then, to a certain degree, those are not products either. Those are services in which that they've been created at scale. Now, just imagine what each and every single one of these services that are created are now having software that ultimately learns how to write itself. Now, just think about the investment dollars. Now, think about, like, for example, now it starts to make sense if I draw it all the way back. See, I told you I was going to geek out, so stick with me because I'm going to tie it all together. If you think about it, Amazon for a long period of time was not profitable. Now, it's not to say that they couldn't be profitable. They could have easily just said, okay, hey, we're going to just stop reinvesting into our own company. And then ultimately we'll be able to show investors that we could be profitable. But if you think pennies, you get pennies. If you think dollars, you get dollars. And Amazon said, okay, hey, we're going to get dollars, but we're going to take the time. Like the good old Chinese proverb says, all great things take time. So if that goes into play, think about what Amazon had to do. They literally said, okay, hey, we'll just keep reinvesting the profits that we would be accounting for. We're going to invest that back into our software stack. We're going to invest that back into our platforms to literally create the services that sit on top of the big machine in which that we are. And ultimately, when we're ready to turn on the lights, we will turn them on. And when we're ready to turn the lights on, can nobody see us? Nobody can touch us. And thus, tell me, name one company in the chat that has been able to touch Amazon. Just one. Just name one. Spoiler alert. You can't name one. You can say that there's companies in there that play within the same space as Amazon, but let's just make no mistake about it. They're not Amazon. And that's okay. We see it across different facets. We make the same jokes about, say, for example, Apple, and that's the reason why Apple learned from its other counterparts within the tech space. Think about it. Apple does sell products, but yet at the same token, what's the fastest growing revenue stream within Apple right now? It's services built from software. Why is it that Microsoft is starting to scale at such a fast rate? Why? Because they use a software in which that they're using a program to learn from the data from its consumers and learn from the data from its enterprise customers to literally start to rewrite itself so that way it can create better services or create services that are lacking within the stack of services that they provide through Azure, its cloud infrastructure, to provide other services that now that the customer always wanted to ask Microsoft, but now it's like Microsoft already knows what the customer wants. And it just keeps getting big. It just keeps getting better and better and better. And that's how this is going to play out. A lot of you are thinking about, well, how is it that I get in? Well, we're at the very beginning. We're at the very precipice. If you looked at, say, for example, the infographic in which that we produced, 2020 was really the start of all of those things that you saw, because now you're seeing that those investments, some of them are starting to pan out. Some of them are starting to take shape, form, and fashion. How do we know this? Tell me. How is it possible for Netflix to literally release a film or a TV show every week over the 52-week calendar? You know, how is it possible that, say, for example, you have companies that are creating vehicles and they're looking to beat other companies, but yet they didn't think to like literally focus on the software part, which was providing you the over-the-air updates. So when they get recalled, they have to get sent back to the mothership versus, say, for example, receiving an over-the-air update that could easily solve the problem. Or the fact that you can easily diagnose. Think about how much people used to spend going to get their car fixed at the mechanic. Now think about what it's going to look like getting your car fixed or getting your car diagnosed and everything else in 2025. And then you have to ask yourselves, who are the players that are literally spending the money right now to make sure that that vision is reality, or that vision is on target for 2025, the 2030s, the 2035s. Those are the places in which that you want to be invested in. A lot of folks ask me, hey, Mark, why aren't you in finance? Because tell me, what is finance doing right now? What is it that they're creating? What is it that they're doing that ultimately that gives them a competitive edge over everybody else? What is it that they're doing? When I look at industrial, okay, I see that they create the same product with maybe a small little iteration here and there, but what services are they building on top of it? If you look at John Deere tractors, what made them so successful was the fact that it wasn't because of the actual machinery, but it was because of the fact that they put a monopoly on, say, for example, the software that sits within their system. So which means that you have to go through John Deere. So the only thing that's really stopping them from literally getting stopped out is somebody creating something that is open source with the same type of machinery that allows it to scale. And then ultimately, what will we still be talking about John Deere? Will we still be talking about the Caterpillars of the world? Who knows? And like I said, wherever you're starting to see where the economy still needs to move forward, it still needs those services, or it still needs that type of work. But whereas most folks within that economy only deign to work, or they don't want to work, you're going to start seeing robotics, or you're going to start seeing those types of tech trends make their way there, because they still got to get done. The job is still got to get done. And so the thing is that, again, some of you guys are going to come back and rewatch this video. And of course, we're going to drop it into the description of the video down below, of where you can read a little bit more on this McKinsey report. And if you want the other stuff, you can just go to Visual Capitalist and it'll be sitting there for you. But it really puts it into perspective for y'all as it pertains to what the current landscape looks like, but also in the sense of, really, today's episode was really just a glimpse of us just reading the spoiler alert for what 2025 will be and what 2030 will be. And if you really paid attention to this episode, then now you know, you pretty much have the keys to the game over the next 5 to 10 years. And on that, I yield my time.
I do want to say, like, just to, cut through, cut through. Two of the main things that stood out with that would be like the homework assignment that you gave, like who are going to be the dominant players. Those are the ones that are creating value. So whoever is creating value, that's where that should be your first clue of, ooh, this is something that I may want to look to invest in, as opposed to who's riding coattails or being a biter, or whatever. And then the other key part that is a big lesson from Amazon is who is the one who is taking their profits and reinvesting in research and developing services. So with those two things, that's a good way to like start looking there and then work backwards. Like find out who those two who those people are or those companies are, and then work backwards, then start to look to see like, where are they innovating? What kind of services are they doing? What are they acquiring? And that will also help your investing long-term trajectory.
Can I say one little thing? I know that we've gone overboard at 7 o'clock, but I feel like I'd be remiss in saying this because a lot of folks are like, well, Mark, you're talking about 5 to 10 years out, but what does that have to do with today? It has everything to do with today. Because if you're not investing into these companies, and I'm probably sure that you're going to start seeing a lot more folks pile into these things. I mean, keep in mind, investment analysts, researchers, and everything else, they take time. They have to sift through this data. They have to learn through this data. And then they have to pitch this data within their groups of folks on the institutional side. And then essentially they have to buy in. And then from that buy-in, they also have to get their customers or their shareholders and everybody else, their stakeholders involved in the landscape of things as well. But the thing is that, again, name one company out there in which that you see that they're a major dominant player that people are not investing into. They may not be investing into it at a higher rate because of the fact that they still have to validate and verify things. But if you know that that's where they're going, now you can start building a roadmap of things in which that they have to verify on that road there, which points towards your thesis every 6 months, every year, every 2 years. You can now start plotting that out as it pertains to where is it that you expect. Hell, if you want to do even the technology sector, you can ask yourself, where will the technology sector be by 2 years or a year from now? Well, we already know what the product releases are. So essentially, what do we expect to be expected from the following year? What is it that investors want to see that is a follow-up precursor? It's like you see a movie and you expect to see, say, for example, if they leave the movie open, you expect to see that there's going to be a sequel to a movie. So the question is that what is it that we should be expecting within this storyline? And investors like stories. They love stories, AKA it creates sentiment. And from that sentiment, it helps you plot out exactly, okay, hey, well, where's it that I want my money to be over this year? Or where's I want my money to be over the next 2 years? And then if you really put it into perspective, if you need some help, go back and look at, say, for example, the timeline. Because here's the thing about charts out there on the market. Some folks use charts as it pertains to technical analysis for the entries and exit points. Charts are also there to tell you the history of the company as it pertains to what the sentiment was and what is it that everybody believes about the stock or about the company. If you go back and look over the last 5 years and the last 5-year trajectory of any company that has literally significantly spiked or that is on the rise, it tells you a story. And all you have to do is just go back and connect those dots as it pertains to the narrative. What do you have? The earnings reports. The earnings reports, alongside with the guidance and what they give you in that narrative, literally helps write the roadmap strategy for you. Everything else, you can literally just look across the entire industry or the entire sector to lead you there. That right there, please don't let that go over your head because that's a gem of a lifetime. And that's ultimately what got me from year 1 all the way to year 5 in my journey.
I just want to say one other thing. Jay Griff, he brought up a question about like, how does this matter when our options expire in a year or so? When we're looking at this, like as far as an investor goes, that's why the rolling forwards method is key to this, because you can have your positions and know where the money is going, like for example, in technology, and then you can continue to roll. And that's kind of like why that strategy is in place and in conjunction with future thinking and innovation, like that it all melds together. So if you're unfamiliar with the rolling fours, then you need to go back and watch the starter pack because that's foundational. All the stuff that's in the starter pack is foundational. If you don't know it like the back of your hand, you have gaps in your knowledge and you will misstep.
Okay, I feel like we've spent today's episode. People are going to have to go back and say, "What did I watch?" And honestly, that's okay. Many of you are just getting started. So essentially, if today is your starting point, that's okay. Leave this as a stop bookmark, and then go back and start at the starter pack, like Jolene had mentioned. If you've already watched the starter pack, and if there's still some gaps there, that's okay. Go back to the starter pack. But essentially, if you already understand this stuff, and if this was a little bit over and you're just like, all right, Mark, I need to see the data, don't worry. It'll be in the description down below for you at the end of this episode. It'll be right there for you to literally go through and read it for yourself. McKinsey, they do a very good job of putting together some good data research. And I can't fully do it the type of justice that it deserves because of the fact that I only have an hour with y'all. So take the time to literally go through and dissect the research. But I promise y'all, there are gems, keys, everything else, blueprints, foundations, everything in which that you need to know that is going to take place over the next 5 to 10. It's going to be sitting right there in this document. And then you can cross-reference that just as a spoiler alert. You can go back and cross-reference that, say, for example, with ARK Invest Big Ideas, because I guarantee you this, you'll start to see some parallels between the narratives as well as the research. Y'all, thank you for rocking with us. It's been real. I know that many of you have you want to go off and watch the NBA finals, so I'm not going to stand in your way to do so. Jolynn, thank you so much for just rocking with me and allowing me to geek out. But this has been a scouting report. If you're scouting for the next 5 years, or if you're scouting as it pertains to lining up everything for yourself, again, you line it up, you take the time and everything else to do it the right way, guaranteed possibly you can actually literally be a winner at this one and become legendary a lot faster than you think. Until next time, I'm Mark Monroe.
And I'm Jolynn GC, and the place to be, hella leisurely.
And this has been your Come Up. We'll see you on Thursday. Have